worked at Burger King during my senior year of high school. I think I worked there for a total of 5 months before quitting. There was one experience in particular that stands out when remembering my time there. It happened towards the end of my 5 months at work. I remember it was a weekend, and I was working a shift which started in the daytime and ended in the late afternoon. During that time, I was working behind the counter and taking orders from customers inside. In the hours that I worked that day, I interacted with so many people. For the most part, everything had seemed normal. Because it was the weekend, we were pretty busy during my entire shift. After I was done, I got off and drove back home. During that time, I lived with my parents and brother, maybe 10 minutes away from the Burger King in a house. When I got back home that day, I remember that my parents and brother were gone. I wasn't sure where they went at the time, but they would occasionally go places, and I didn't mind being by myself. When I got back, it was probably like 6 or 7 p.m. I made some food and then went into the living room. I was home for probably an hour and still by myself when there was a knock at the front door. It seemed a little bit odd because it was dark out by now. The sun had just set. Not knowing who it was, I got up and walked over to the door. I looked outside and saw that a man was standing there. He was about average height and just wearing a t-shirt, shorts, and appeared to be in his 40s. I didn't think he was a neighbor, but I thought that maybe that was possible. I was curious and decided to answer. After opening up the door, the guy said hi to me. He looked a little bit familiar for some reason after I got a closer view of his face. The guy asked me if I remembered him from earlier. I tried to think if I did, but I couldn't place exactly where I had seen him. I asked him from what. The man said that he was disappointed I forgot. He then told me that he was at Burger King earlier today. He said that I took his order, and when he said that, I did kind of remember him. It's just that I dealt with so many customers, it was all kind of a blur sometimes. Still, what exactly was this guy doing here at my house? After standing there awkwardly for a few seconds, I just asked him that. The man told me that he thought I seemed really cool and wanted to hang out. He pointed over to his car. A sedan was parked on the side of the road a little ways back. The guy said that we could go right now. Now, keep in mind, I was a senior in high school at the time, and this guy was like 20 years older than me at least, so this was really weird. I was shocked at what he was saying, and I said no thanks to him. He urged me to change my mind, and I started to close the door. Finally, he said, "All right then," in a disappointed tone, and then started walking off. I was relieved to see him go. After closing and locking the door, I started to realize just how odd of a situation that was. Not only was a random guy much older than me trying to get me to go in his car with him, but he showed up at my house. How would this man know where I lived anyways? He would have had to follow me home. I became really creeped out by this and felt lucky that he didn't try to force his way in or anything. I went over and looked back out the window to see if the guy had left. He didn't. The man's car was still parked on the side of the road in the same spot, and he was in the driver's seat. I watched him for like 2 minutes straight, and he didn't drive away. I was starting to get concerned about this. His car was not parked directly in front of our house, but a little ways down. It was kind of between the side of our yard and our next door neighbors. I did my best to ignore it and was telling myself that he would probably drive away soon, but I couldn't help but worry that he might get out of his car and knock on the door again or something. About an hour went by. I was still home by myself, and I went to the window to check. I couldn't believe it, but he was still there. I could also see that he was still inside of his car. I didn't know what to do and thought that he would have been gone for sure. But just about a minute later, I heard my parents pulling into the driveway. I was glad that they were home. When they made it inside, I told them about the guy. My dad ended up going outside to confront him, but before he could make it even close to the guy's car, the man drove away. After that night, I never saw him again. I only worked at Burger King for a few more weeks after that. Burger King one busy afternoon about a year ago. I was going to pick up some food and bring it back home, and when I got there, I saw that the place was very busy. There was a long line, and many other people sat at tables inside. The employees seemed really busy as well, trying to keep up with the rush of people. I realized that I had probably gone at a bad time, and I got into the back of the line and waited. Things actually moved by pretty quickly though, and eventually it was my turn to order. After I placed my order, I stepped aside and waited for it to be done. There seemed to be quite a few people working there. I looked around the busy restaurant as I waited, and about 5 minutes later, I heard my order being called. I walked up to the counter and a man was holding my bag of food. I took it and then started walking away to the exit. When I started walking though, I remembered that I realized my shoelace had become untied. I stopped sort of by the door at an open table and set the bag of food down on it. Then I tied my shoe again. When I looked up from tying my shoe, there was a Burger King employee standing right there looking at me. I stood up and saw that he appeared to be angry. The man then said that I didn't say thank you to him. I was really confused and asked him what he was talking about. He then accused me of playing dumb. He told me that he handed me my food and I didn't even say thank you. Now, I admit that I didn't say thank you to the guy, and it was a mistake. Usually I do, but I guess I just forgot that time because things were so busy and people were everywhere. When I realized what he was talking about, I said, "Oh, my bad, you're right, I'm sorry. Well, thank you." He was not satisfied with this. The employee told me that it was too late, and he then grabbed my food from the table. He called me a piece of garbage and then took the food and stuck it into a nearby trash can. I couldn't believe what he had just done. I mean, I apologized and said thank you to him, and I also paid for that food. I didn't think it was right for him to throw it away. The guy then told me to get out of his restaurant and stormed off to the employees area. He seemed to disappear in the back and out of my sight, and then I walked up to the counter. Things were still pretty busy, but another employee soon asked me what it was that I needed. I told her that a guy who worked here just took my food and tossed it in the garbage because I didn't say thank you. The employee told me that she knew who I was talking about, and she said that she thought he had anger problems. She said he often snapped at people for random reasons. I had thought maybe he was a manager, but I was told that he wasn't. I asked if my order could be remade, and as I was doing so, the man emerged from the back. He immediately locked eyes with me, and I saw his expression go to anger again. He stormed over and intervened. He told the other employee to go away and not to talk to me. Then he claimed that I was banned from the store. The other employee looked a little bit stressed, and I said that I would leave. I said, "Forget my order, I don't want to cause any problems. I'm just gonna leave. I apologize for not saying thank you, but I think you have some anger problems, man." Then I turned and started walking out of the restaurant. I probably should not have said that last part about anger problems to the guy. I saw out of the corner of my eye him walking over to me again. I sped up and made it outside of the restaurant, but he followed me out. When we were both in the parking lot, he started yelling and cursing at me. He followed me all the way to my car, and he even tried to get me to fight him, but I declined. I kept going and got inside my car. I was trying to keep my cool, but I really wanted to yell back at him. Still, I didn't. When I got in my car and was in my driver's door, I told him to leave me alone or I would call the police. The guy just flipped me off with both hands as I drove away, leaving the Burger King. After that experience, I never went back. It was interesting to hear the other employee's take on the guy. She seemed to know right away who would do something like that. That tells me that he probably did have some anger management issues. I'm just glad that he didn't actually try to fight me. This is an experience that I had when I was in high school. During that time, I played basketball, and this was during my sophomore year. I was on the junior varsity team, and one day after school we had practice. Now, my school only had a couple of gyms, and we had to share them with other sports teams. Because of this, our practice times would rotate. On this day in particular, we had the late time slot, which meant practice would go from 7 p.m. to 9:30. I rode the bus home from school in the afternoon, and then my parents drove me to practice later. That night, I remember that we got done with practice pretty early. I think it was over by like 8:45. My parents had been planning to get there to pick me up at like 9:45, so I wanted to text them to come earlier. I walked outside to the parking lot with a couple of teammates and said bye to them. When I tried to text my mom, though, I saw that I had used up all of my data. My phone couldn't even send a text or call. This was frustrating, and I couldn't get on the school Wi-Fi because I remembered that they changed the password at the time. So I decided to walk to a Burger King that was nearby. There were a few businesses within walking distance of our high school. It was like a gas station, a library, a Burger King, and a small grocery store that was now closed. It took like 5 minutes to walk to the Burger King that was across the street and a little ways down. I entered the restaurant and saw that it was very quiet. I didn't immediately notice anybody else inside. I was also very hungry, having just got done with practice. I had a little bit of money I carried around for food and stuff, and I ordered something small and cheap to hold me over until I got home. Then I walked into the dining room area and sat down at a booth. After sitting down, I was able to connect to the Wi-Fi, and I texted my mom to let her know to come and pick me up now. I also told her to come to the Burger King and not the high school. My mom replied pretty quickly and said that she would be on her way now. This meant that she would probably be there in around 10 to 15 minutes. I looked around the restaurant and noticed that there was actually one other person there. In one of the booths in the back corner, a man sat by himself, except I couldn't tell any details about the man. He wasn't directly facing me, and he was wearing a sweatshirt with the hood up. He was leaning over with his hands on his head. He almost had the look of a kid who fell asleep in class. It seemed slightly sketchy to me, but not a big deal. I started playing some games on my phone and finished eating as I waited for my mom to arrive. Probably 5 minutes later, though, I happened to notice the guy again. He was sitting there in the same position, but then he stood up. When he did, I saw that he was very skinny and slightly tall. He then turned to face me, and I noticed that he was also wearing sunglasses. I looked away casually and back to my phone. I expected the man to walk out of the restaurant or something, but instead, I could tell that he was walking over to me. He kept getting closer and closer. I thought maybe he would go past me to exit, but when he got to me, he just stopped. Then, he sat down at the same booth that I was in, directly across from me. I was kind of creeped out. I looked up at him and couldn't tell if he was looking at me or not because of the sunglasses. I noticed he had long and stringy hair as well. After a few seconds, I said hi to the guy and asked how he was doing. He didn't answer me and just kept sitting there. This was really weird. After like a minute, he still wasn't leaving. I said that I was going to be going, and I said goodnight to the guy. He still said nothing. I just wanted to get away from him at that point. I got up and walked quickly towards the exit. The man was still sitting there, but as I was making my way to the doors, I noticed him standing up. After I left the Burger King, I began walking back over to my high school because I didn't really know where else to go. As I walked along the sidewalk, I soon noticed that the man had also left Burger King. He was now on the sidewalk walking behind me. He was maybe 50 feet back. I was really concerned. I made it all the way back to my high school parking lot, and by now, all of my teammates and coaches had left. The parking lot was basically empty, and the school was locked. I wouldn't be able to get inside. The only people there were janitors. When I got there, the man was still walking behind me. I didn't stop though and kept walking. I walked on the sidewalk, then went all the way around the school. When I got to the back of the school, things were really dark, and the guy followed me back there too. I quickly walked all the way back around the school again, and he was still trailing me. Soon, I made it back to the sidewalk and didn't know where else to go. But that's when I saw my mom's car driving down the road and entering the Burger King parking lot. I started walking on the sidewalk again over to Burger King. I sped up my walking speed and checked behind me. The man was still there and still about 50 feet back. He had sped up the same amount that I did. I didn't know what he was doing or why he was following me. When I made it to where you crossed the road to go to Burger King, I just started running. I sprinted across until I had made it to my mom's car. I got inside and told her to leave quickly. She asked me what was going on, and I told her. Meanwhile, we looked, and the man was still approaching. He had just crossed the street and was starting to enter the Burger King parking lot. He wasn't running, but walking at a really fast pace. My mom then drove off before he could reach our car. The guy was left standing there, and I was happy to get away from him. After that night, I never saw him again. I don't know why he followed me or who he was, but I'm really glad that my mom showed up when she did.